Welcome, Travis Petersen. How are you today?
Good morning, Anthea. I'm very well. It's good to chat to you again after quite a break.
Yep, we've both
So,
been very busy sorting out practical things in our own lives. But I really appreciate you making time to speak again and to be willing to be recorded so that we can share what you're doing with other people. So, just to give any viewers some context and some information about you, you have a BSc in biotechnology, which you got from UCT, and then
UWC,
UWC, sorry, and then you got a postgraduate diploma in computer forensics from UCT. Is that correct?
that's correct.
Okay, and you work as a guest house owner and manager in Marmary, which is a small village up the west coast outside Cape Town, about 50 k's from Cape Town.
That's correct.
But the main topic of conversation here is the EduPortal, which is an online platform that provides educational resources to students or learners and parents and teachers that you established during COVID-19 at the very early stages as we went into lockdown. So maybe you can just start by telling us a little bit about what the EduPortal is.
Well, Anthea, essentially, when we went into lockdown in March,
Mhm.
um, prior to the lockdown, I already had the idea of creating something that will benefit the school children in the whole country.
Yeah.
And more so because of my niece that is currently writing her matric exams, final exams, which by the way, they started yesterday for the whole country. It
It's
was
crazy
in
that it's come up so quickly.
absolutely. So she was one of my main motivating factors for trying to collect as much resources out there to facilitate her in helping preparing for her final exams. That was one of the main reasons. But the other reason was more of trying to kickstart my idea of putting together a platform where everybody can benefit. More specifically, the school children in the high schools.
Okay.
When the COVID arrived, it just sort of gave me the boost to put all my energy and focus into it. And then essentially, I've scoured the whole internet. I've made use of various platforms such as Telegram, your WhatsApp groups, your Facebook, and of course, I also heavily relied on my friends and colleagues who happen to be in the education sector,
Okay.
and they supplied me with most of these resources. Um, and then I just sort of collected them all together and put them in a way where everybody can easily access it. So those are all readily available resources that you'll find out there on the internet.
Okay. So obviously none of the material is copyrighted. You know what I mean? You're giving people access to material that is freely available already on the internet, but the idea is just to bring it all together into one place.
Absolutely, that's why I call it an EduPortal,
Okay.
whereby I brought together all the already available information, and everything still maintains its own original content. Nothing was changed. It's merely a collection of URLs
Okay.
and dedicated websites that point to where they already exist on the internet. And I've also mentioned in my background of the portal, giving credit to every single resource that I've cited.
Yes.
So nothing is my own personal
Mm-hmm.
information,
Mm-hmm.
information that's already at the click of a mouse button that you can find out on the internet.
Okay. And you said that the portal is mainly, well, your initial idea was to support especially high school students, obviously because your niece is close to you and you saw her difficulties in accessing resources. Have you provided resources for primary school students and teachers, learners, teachers and parents as well, or is it still just restricted to high school?
Actually, I've expanded the old resources from grade, I think, 4
Okay.
to right up to grade 12, but I've concentrated more on the high school students.
Okay.
But if you go through the portal, you'll notice that there are resources from grade 4 right up to grade 12. And of course, if you go to the different specific online resources, some of them also start from grade R right up to grade 12. So I wouldn't say that it's only for high school, but it's concentrated a bit more on the high school side than on the primary school side. But there are certain websites which cover the whole Department of Basic Education curriculum from
Okay.
grade R right up to grade 12.
Can you provide some examples of the websites that you're linking to, ones that you think are providing both a sufficiently broad range of resources as well as perhaps excellent resources in particular subject areas? Do any of those sites come to mind when you think about
So many,
that range?
Anthea, I have to quickly open up the page and then scroll through it. Um, sure. I can't really say them offhand because there's literally hundreds and hundreds of links that I provided.
Okay.
But if I could maybe look at this one called Advantage Learn, many Afrikaans websites as well.
Okay.
We have your Via Africa,
Mm-hmm.
Sia Vunda, is it?
Siavula?
Sia Vula,
Mm-hmm.
Via Africa, um, of course, the Western Cape online portal as well.
Yes, they've got a
That,
lot of resources.
yeah, that's a portal that I've cited extensively on the website. There's even a link on the main web page that links directly to them with the dedicated media releases as well. In fact, I've spoken before the interview with you a few months ago,
Mm.
I spoke with one of the content creators. I think her name is, I will say it, Brown. Um, Also something similar to what we're doing right now. She just wanted to know more about the portal itself.
Sure.
So I've actually cited the recent Cape Education Department online portal extensively. In fact, when I spoke to her, I mentioned to her that in terms of user navigation and usability,
Mm.
I find it very user-friendly. And she concurred with me, and they were in fact in the process of updating the website.
Right.
But I just went online now and they still got the old website. So I don't know when they plan to do the release, but it is
Okay.
due for a major user interface experience. It's, not very user friendly, to be honest.
Okay. Yeah, I guess
Um,
that is the thing with digital. It has to be easily accessible. In my own experience, and that makes it user friendly. One of the things I notice is that some websites load quicker than others, for instance. So that can, be a mitigating factor when it comes to user friendliness. And then obviously the way it's organized. Because when we organize information, we obviously make some assumptions about how users or what kinds of information users are looking for, but also the way they go about accessing information. So I don't know what design considerations you included when you did the development of the site and the curation of the resources. And you give us a little bit more information about that?
yeah, look, when I've created the EduPortal,
Mm-hmm.
I was very mindful of the fact that you have different types of users out there. You have those that are extremely tech savvy
Okay.
and take to technology very, very easily. And that stems from my previous experience as a computer trainer, where you would have students of different levels of technology, how they would take to technology. So
Mm-hmm.
you have those that are quite tech savvy, and then you
Sure.
have the other end of the scale, which literally you have to teach them how to use a mouse.
Sure.
So keeping that in mind, I try to keep it as simple as possible. So when you look at the actual design, I've used a feature called the accordion feature. So when you click on the link and then it expands and it reveals the content. And it has different features within the accordion as well. So some would have a built-in PDF reader. So that will ensure that somebody accessing the portal on a smartphone doesn't need to download, for example, a PDF reader in order to read the document. It will automatically open up with a built-in PDF reader. So that is
It's
one that
very, very useful. Okay. What kind of, yeah, carry on, sorry.
And then, of course, you have lots of graphic, what's it called, a image carousel. So you can just swipe on your phone and you can see the different pages, you know, and that in itself also facilitates the ease of use on most people using the smartphones to access the information. So I try to keep the technology as simple as possible because the EduPortal is designed not only for the school children, but also for parents and teachers. And we all know that the older generation of teachers, they tend to have a sort of aversion to technology.
Well, I'm older as well, so I understand some of that aversion at times when I'm feeling incompetent. I'm like, oh, do I have to do it this way? I empathize.
Before he passed away, he never used a computer in his life.
Wow.
He would still use a typewriter and his Tipex, you know, to make corrections. So that's the old type of old school teachers I'm talking about. So I kept mine as well. So if they go to my portal, it doesn't matter of 1 or 2 clicks maximum, and they will then access the resources.
Okay.
So I didn't want to make the complicated matters. You know, for example, if you go to some other websites, you'll have to click 3 or 4 times before you actually get to the information. And that is one of my biggest frustrations, because unfortunately, most of the websites out there are designed by guys who have the technical know-how,
Yes.
but not user experience. So you have to have a whole team of people that are specialists in the field, from the user design to the database developers, to the script writers, you know, so to the graphic designers, you know, you need to have a whole team.
Sure.
And I was the only person in this project.
It's phenomenal what you've achieved on your own, because I've looked at the portal. So truly, it's phenomenal what you managed to achieve, especially during lockdown.
Information. So I had to keep all that in mind. Obviously, there's a great deal of improvement. So this was only my version 1.0. And obviously, there's going to be lots of changes in the future. And I'm already working at a different user interface.
Okay.
Trying also to then add more additional resources. So hopefully by next year, I will start adding much more information, different options, different features that will be of great benefit to everybody.
Well, thank you very much for what you're doing.
It's still a work in progress.
I think anything that is, well, not only user-friendly, but also has ongoing utility for its users, right, has to remain a work in progress, because we all need to be responsive, not only to technological developments, but also to feedback from users, which, if we're lucky, they will provide. So I am curious to know 2 things: who your primary users are at the moment, if you're able to assess that at this stage, and then what kind of feedback you've had from users up to this point.
I think since we last had a Zoom meeting, and also my answers to those questions that you sent me, I think much has changed to what I've answered previously.
Okay.
I've just gone through my answers to you that I sent a few months ago, and I mentioned in one of my answers that I haven't done any monitoring or analytics. Well, monitoring to a very limited extent.
Sure, at that stage.
I think in order to do much more analytics, I don't really have that skill set.
Right.
So I can't really say who accessed what, because that wasn't my main aim. I just wanted to get the content out there. I suppose as when the website does increase in size,
Mm-hmm.
then I will bring in all these things, but hopefully I will have help with that specific skill set.
For sure.
In terms of feedback, as I mentioned earlier as well, I do tend to get a few requests, but not really feedback. Maybe one or two compliments for the work that I've done. But in terms of feedback, most of the people that made contact, I think they were under the misguided idea that I was there to assist each and every person, you know. So
Yes.
they would ask anything from how do I access a certain resource or paper from the DBE, for example, or my daughter is unable to get into university or something
Mm.
totally outrageous, you know.
Mm.
So I think most of them, or some of them, can't really see the concept that I was trying to achieve. Um, some of them also were a bit confused with the login that I explained the previous time.
Mm-hmm.
That is for future development. So I kept the login button there, and then some of them would then email me asking me, how do I access the website? You know,
Mm.
so their first thought is to click on the login button
Sure.
and
Yes.
then try to access
Mm.
anything. Whereas they just have, when they land on the page, that is
Mm.
the main page. They just needed to scroll down, you know, and
Mm.
go through this whole thing. So perhaps that is something I need to look at to make it much more intuitive to the user. But
Yeah.
otherwise, in terms
Mm.
of feedback, wasn't that much.
Okay.
Um, Also, maybe because I didn't market the thing in such great detail, except for putting it out on Facebook and WhatsApp groups and Telegram groups
Mm.
and word of mouth.
Sure.
So there wasn't a real a marketing campaign targeting specific demographics in this country.
Sure. So, what demographic would you like to target going forward?
Oh, um, anybody that is still at school,
Okay.
essentially. So essentially that covers the whole country. Um, but I would say people preparing for their matric exams. So finishing off grade 11, moving on to grade 12, which is why I'm about to concentrate more on providing additional resources for the matriculants next year.
Yes.
So they prepare for the exams, I can actually have targeted information for them. So if they're looking for study guides, say for CAT,
Yes.
for example, or they looking for how-tos in consumer studies, then at the click of a mouse, it will be at the ready,
Mm.
taking into account that I don't want them to click 4 or 5 times before they get to the resource.
For sure.
So if I say, click here to download paper one for English first language, the moment they click, immediately it will come up as a download option. You know?
Sure.
That's kind of stuff that I want to provide to them next year.
Okay. And you mentioned earlier that the EduPortal is also designed to meet the needs of parents and teachers. And I'm particularly interested to understand what needs you think parents have, based also, on your own experience in your own community, as well as perhaps through speaking to people in your network. Because you said you have teachers in your broader network. What needs you think parents have that could be fulfilled by a site such as the EduPortal, and then also what teacher needs you're aiming to fulfill?
Yeah, look, COVID-19 has exposed the great inequalities between the haves and the have-nots, and especially those that do not have access to something which is a human right, which is access to data. In fact, just yesterday on SABC News, they interviewed a matriculant um, about his preparation for the final exams, and he lived in a shack. And he said, number one, he didn't have access to data, or he would run out of data while preparing for the exams. Secondly, because he lives in the shack, there's absolutely no way that he can concentrate on his studies with everybody in that confined space. So he has to walk quite a distance, a few kilometers, to go to a creche,
Right.
which has made available the premises to them for matriculants to study. So those are one of the few challenges of many that people, especially in the rural areas, face. I can even cite my own area of Mamre. We don't have access to telecom infrastructure. We never had access to ADSL, let alone
Yes.
fiber. So I'm running a guest house and I need to have access online. And I have to spend thousands of rands on data every month because I have to provide a Wi-Fi service as well. And
Sure.
it's an arm and a leg. So that's one of the main challenges that most parents face who are already struggling to make ends meet.
So how
So
though would the EduPortal help solve that challenge, given that in order to access it, you need data and a lot, and data we know is very expensive in South Africa, and therefore unaffordable for the majority of people to have, access to the kinds of data packages that, and I don't call it like infrastructure, but Wi-Fi routers, the setup costs are also expensive. How would the EduPortal go aim to help solve that challenge, specifically for parents who are the providers of data to, and access to the internet for their children?
so the EduPortal is this, I haven't thought about it right now.
Okay.
It's actually the very first phase of a long-term project. So the first phase was to collate all the data and put it together in an easily accessible format. The second major phase is to ensure that people have access to that portal. And that is what I intend as an issue I try to solve, because I think 80% of our current population do not have access to online resources. And I know there's somebody a professor at the University of Mandela,
And
in
Nelson
your
Mandela Metropolitan
university.
University in PE, yeah?
And I can't get to his name right now, but they try to address a similar issue of people's lack of access to data. And I think they mentioned something of a device that allows the students to have access to the data. But
Okay.
in order to, you first have to have the capital in order to buy the device before you can even get to the data itself. So my aim is to do away with the device and somehow make use of what most households already have, which is a TV
Hmm.
with a built-in USB port. And I'm I don't know if you are familiar with what's called over-the-air updates on your cell phone, whereby
Assume I have
your
zero tech knowledge because it's as close to zero as possible.
phone gets updated regularly with the operating system over the air. So
Yes,
essentially, a company like Samsung, for example, would then, if you have access to the Wi-Fi,
yes,
will
it
then
updates. Yeah,
send
sends you an
wirelessly
update. Yeah.
data and update your firmware. So I'm looking at something similar, where students can have that information on a USB stick. They just stick it on in the USB port on the TV, and Bob's your uncle, and they then can access all the information right there. Or if they do not have that option, maybe at school, where the school will have a server or access to the internet, where they can just update the USB stick with the information. So
Yeah.
it's just a thought that I'm working with currently.
Yeah.
I'm still very much far away from implementing it, but it's
Yes.
just one of my thought processes that I'm trying to use
I
in
mean,
order to.
what I, for sure, and I mean, it actually sounds like a profoundly innovative idea. So I look forward to, staying in touch with you and actually understanding or, hearing how that goes. Um, what I hear often, and it's also not something that I fully understand, so it'd be interesting to have you explain it as well as tell me, whether or not it's an option for the Edu portal, is that certain sites are zero rated in terms of data. So first of all, what does that mean? How is that possible? And then would that be an option for the Edu portal?
The idea is noble, and one has to acknowledge all those service providers that came on board to try to address the issue of data for those that do not have access to it. So zero-based websites essentially mean that you are able to access, if you have the connection number one, right, to the internet, and you go to a site called Vodacom, Vodacom would have dedicated subdomains,
Okay.
which is essentially a branch of the main website dedicated to educational resources. So anybody that then goes online to that particular website will not incur any data cost.
Okay.
The problem is that most of these zero-based websites will inevitably link to external resources.
Mm.
And the moment you do that, then the whole concept of zero-base goes out the window.
All right. So that's the
So,
catch.
for example, if Vodacom doesn't have access to all the information which is hosted on their website, then you will then incur cost.
All right.
And I've actually included all the zero-based websites on the portal itself. So
Is it in a
Telcom,
separate tab? Do you
yes,
do you actually list it? Okay.
Vodacom, so see all the major mobile service providers, they've actually provided zero-based websites,
Okay.
as well as the major universities as well.
Hmm.
So, for
And
example,
the
UCT,
DBE is the, sorry, I'm interrupting you, but is the DBE site zero rated as well?
I'm speaking under correction, I think they are.
Okay.
However, I haven't tested it on my own phone,
Right.
but I think they are, because they've actually said, or it was directed by government to all the ISPs, that they do need to actually provide zero-based sites to all the students.
Okay.
So that was the directive that was sent around. In fact, I was even sent an application form that you can apply to have your site zero rated as well.
Hmm.
So when students access your site, then they will not incur any data.
Are you going to pursue that in the short term?
Uh, it's not as straightforward unless you are a service provider or and you provide dedicated web services.
Okay.
Um, I don't really fall under that, because I host my own the portal on a external service provider. So
Okay.
I have to apply to them if they can provide those services.
Yeah, that's tricky. Yeah, there's always a network of interdependencies when one is, or when one's involved in a value chain, right? Which essentially is what you are involved in, and it's it's interesting for someone like me who doesn't understand how all of that works to, and hence I'm sure for other people, to get the insights about what zero based or zero rated sites actually mean in practice. All right, so that's a very interesting idea. I don't understand the tech behind over the air updates via a television and how those would work, because I'm only used to using my Wi-Fi in order to update the latest operating system release for my cell phone or whatever it is. Um, do you know of anywhere else in the world where that approach you're suggesting is being used?
Um, Up to now, I haven't heard of anything of that kind. I don't know if anybody else has thought of it.
Okay.
I don't know if that technology can be applied, but I'm just thinking sort of out of the box, and thought maybe one
That's the way
can
to do
use
it.
that
Yeah,
technology
sure.
to use it. I don't know if it's applicable, but that is just how my thought process is. I'm just playing around with all kinds of ideas, you know.
Yeah, it's fantastic. No, I think that's really exciting, actually. And I'm very curious to hear more about what you discover as you investigate it, because I think that could be a real game changer for many people, and also for many users, but also for many providers who are looking to donate resources, but the cost of getting the resource, the distribution cost, um, previously it used to be the printing cost, right, and the distribution cost if you're sending hard copy as a donation, but now you very much have the cost of distribution via the net to contend with. So if you, I mean, what we've actually been, highlighting, or what you've been highlighting by means of engaging with these questions is the number of challenges that exist in order to provide online education to the majority of South Africans. And the big part that has come out in the conversation we've had thus far is that of data cost. I also always think about the kinds of devices that people use and the extent to which a cell phone can really provide for all of one's input needs, sort of text-based or even graphic-based input needs. Obviously, it's very good for video. We're used to using it for that, but I know my own cell phone, and I've got quite a large screen. It's an old iPhone, but still, it's got one of those quite large screens. I still have to, try to increase the text if I really want to have an easy reading experience. So that's one concern. I have the other concern I have is around language. So, you mentioned that you're providing Afrikaans resources, links to Afrikaans resources as well. Obviously, if we're using globally accessible resources, the majority of those, well, we're only going to access the English ones, but very many resources are produced in English. But we also have 9 other languages that are mediums of teaching and learning, at least in the foundation phase, but that actually remain, learners' mother tongues. And we know that in schools, learners and teachers engage in code switching. So, there'll be, because students are forced to learn through medium of English or Afrikaans from grade 4, when a teacher who is teaching a class of isiXhosa learners, for instance, explains the concept, she'll mention the concept in English, give the English explanation, but then also obviously explain it by means of mother tongue, because that is the most accessible language for learners. So I don't know what your thoughts are about those 2 further challenges, that of language and accessibility in that regard, as well as the issue of devices. And then if you see any other challenges as well to expanding access to online education in South Africa.
Yeah, I think mother tongue instruction is it's a major issue in this country.
It is.
And I think studies have shown that people who are taught in the mother tongue are much more successful than those who are taught in the second or third language.
Sure.
And I think government needs to address this quite urgently, because I think that's one of the main contributing factors why most first year students actually fail, because
Language
they are not.
is a huge issue. Yeah,
It's a massive thing, and they now have to all of a sudden learn something which is in a language which is not the first language or even the second language. So that is a massive issue. I won't say I've addressed that issue on my portal, but there is a link where there are resources that actually go into the mother tongue resources that have been actually published in the different official languages. I think there's like 6 or 7 that I have.
And for what grades are those? Can you remember? Because there are a lot of resources available in all languages for grades R to 3, because the medium of instruction is mother tongue. We do have mother tongue instruction, home language instruction.
I need to go on onto the portal itself to actually.
Oh, it's fine. I just wondered if you could remember offhand.
I can't remember it offline, but there is definitely one of the options where one actually see it in those different languages, from Tswana to Sotho to Benda, to Zulu. So, but it's minuscule, and unfortunately, the majority of languages being used in this country would be the Afrikaans and English, and if you're in the Western Cape, it's Xhosa as well.
Okay, so in response to what you were saying now about language of learning and teaching, and the fact that you highlighted 3 languages, which are the languages that we use in the Western Cape, English, Afrikaans, and isiXhosa. The policy that is carried throughout all the provinces and all the schools who have foundation phase classes is that learners learn through medium of their home language. So any one of the 11 languages, whichever one is theirs, and then obviously teachers teach through medium of that language, and they teach all subjects, okay, with the exception obviously of English first additional language, which is taught through medium of English, but obviously learners are supported in the acquisition of English as an additional language by means of code switching. So we know that code switching, which is where teachers explain a concept, provide the concept in English and then explain it by means of the home language, is prevalent throughout the grades in which learners are forced to study by means of a language that is not their home language. So one of my questions is around what opportunities exist in an online teaching and learning environment to support learners, you know, to kind of build in the code switching, right? And I know you, because you've told me previously that you're working on a learner management system as well. And so I'm curious to know whether or not you would think, you know, that would be easy enough to build in. And then to go back to the previous part of what we were talking about, one of the challenges of online learning and teaching is obviously linked to the kind of device you have. And I guess your learning style, you know, what you're familiar with and what's easy for you. So I've studied by means of, you know, online course, you know, I've studied online courses, and I find that I have to use my laptop because my cell phone screen is too small for me. Okay, so I'm curious then also to know, you know, what you think about the limitations of cell phones as delivery devices, and then when you're thinking of your own learner management system, you know, what you would prioritize in terms of device, or I don't know if you've even thought about that. So those are the thoughts that occur to me. So over to you.
Right. To address the first issue of home language, that's quite difficult, given the fact that since the dawn of our new democracy, we now have 11 official languages. Mm-hmm. But for all practical purposes, English is the most predominant language. Yep. At the expense of the other, I would say 9. If you take away Afrikaans,
yeah,
which is
Afrikaans still, yeah.
Well, and all this also depends on in which province you are. So
in the Western Cape, Afrikaans is obviously a big.
So language. That is a major obstacle which the government obviously will have to address. Mm-hmm. But from a technological point of view, it will make it even doubly more difficult to have the expertise of somebody to sit down with the developers, you know, and first creating the main language, which would be English, because that is the default computer language, right, across the world. Then you need to have your interpreters, you know, and people as code switching to translate from English to whichever of the other 10 languages you want to convert to. It can be done, but it's a huge undertaking. While I was busy developing an LMS, I came across what's referred to as RT, meaning reading from right to left.
Yes.
Which is the Arabic way of reading, right? Mm. Right reading, so you read from right to left. So it has already been developed by developers where you can just click by means of one button, and it immediately converts all the text into Arabic, and also, or not even into Arabic, but just converting the text reading from right to left.
Okay.
Already has been done, so it can be done if they can do it for the Arabic language or the readers and writers across the world. It can be done for our other 10 indigenous languages as well.
I agree that tech can assist with translations, all right? But I've worked in educational publishing and developed, many textbooks and readers, etc., for foundation phase in all 11 languages. And we did use a tech-based solution which uses translation memory software. So you build the translation memory as people are doing the translations, and then you put your English text through the translation memory bank, the database, and it picks out, sorry, which translations exist already, and then the actual translator goes in, adds what's missing, but then should go back through all of it in order to ensure that the translations are accurate and not just literal, because what you often pick up is that nuance is missed. So in a very big project I did, for CAPS implementation, we used translation memory software, which allowed us to produce very many textbooks in a very short period of time. But then we had to add an extra layer, which is that we had to actually get people in-house to also go back through all of it. So it is very labor intensive, and I'm not sure at this stage, where translation memory software is with regards to being able to pick up the very many different nuances in what you're trying to express. So that's just a little bit of background about that.
Yeah, to use a common example, Google Translate, as you just mentioned, it does translation to an okay degree, but it's very literal, and it loses its context,
Yes.
and common grammar, because certain words, there isn't a translation for certain word in a different language.
Sure.
So you need to have a experienced translator to come in and then fill in the gaps, and make it more readable and to make it more sense out of it. So yeah, it can become a very labor intensive.
And the further challenge is that when one writes for learners, essentially, one is always taking their context into consideration as well. It's one of the key things. So it's not just a case of, and one needs to understand the pedagogy, teaching and learning theory when one's writing. So there are, how one builds that into translation memory software is something that I'm not saying is impossible, and with artificial intelligence and the capacity of computers to learn at speed, we probably will see solutions to that problem, but I'm just not aware of any at this stage. And obviously, building a solution to that problem requires many resources, both human and capital as well. So, but yeah, it's a very interesting problem to solve, and whomever solves that problem would be doing humanity a great service and would corner the market. It's a good incentive to solve the problem, right? Yeah. So about devices, if you can just tell me what you're thinking about in terms of your own LMS and with your experience of using cell phones, for instance, as a learning device, teaching a learning device.
Look, information is at the tip of your finger, and almost the majority of those that have access to a mobile device can now access information by just tapping the screen or whichever device you use. So be it a tablet, a phablet, which is a combination of a phone and a tablet. You have your Kindles, Amazon Kindles. All those devices obviously allow you to access information and to read it on the go. And that is why almost every single website that is now currently being developed has to have a responsive design, meaning that whatever you view on the laptop or on the desktop needs to be able to be displayed on a mobile device responsively. So it will adapt to whichever size smart device you might access information from. So that's a very, very key requirement when developing a website. It has to be responsive. And fortunately, most of the developers out there create ready-made templates
Mm-hmm.
So all you have to do is just essentially buy the template from the developer, upload your own content, modify some tweaks here and there with your content and your images, and the template will do the rest in the background.
Okay. So,
So
yeah.
whether you view it on the laptop or on the desktop, it will be equally displayed exactly the same on your mobile device.
So then the only differences between using a laptop, for instance, or a desktop, or a tablet or a tablet or a phablet or a phone, would be around size of device, so size of screen,
Yeah.
and then if I'm just thinking of my personal experience, how easy it may or may not be to take notes while you are, because when I'm studying um, on my laptop, I quickly I've got my little taskbar at the bottom, so I can easily go into my notes feature and then make a few notes, right? Maybe I just haven't spent enough time on my cell phone to figure out how to do that. Um, because that's probably the issue. Um, so I'm just trying to think through, what the kinds of differences are and possible obstacles are.
Yeah, look, first prize is for each one of us to have a desktop, to be able to view the information on a very large screen.
Okay.
So that's why most people opt for the large flat screen TVs, the bigger the better,
Sure.
because for those who, like us, who are bespectacled, we need to, have a large screen.
Definite
Um,
limitation.
so mobile devices aren't the best device to view information, but for ready access, easy accessibility, there's no equal. But if you want to use it for extended periods, then it becomes kind of a hindrance.
Mm.
And so, yes, a mobile device has got lots of limitations, but for those who do not have access to laptops and desktops, that's the only option most of them would have.
Mm.
However, having said that, because at the latest stats, 80% of our population do not even
Okay.
have access to the internet, let alone a smart device.
Sure.
Or maybe in the family, only one member has a
Mm.
smart device and it's being shared by the whole family.
For sure.
So that already adds an additional burden onto the learner, because now he or she wants to access the information, but then mom or dad wants to make a quick phone call or send a
Mm.
text or whatever the
Mm.
case may be. So yeah, and most families don't even have a smartphone.
Mm.
They only have a small phone that can send
A feature
SMSs.
phone. Is it called a feature
Yeah,
phone?
oh,
Yeah.
a feature phone. Yes, that's
Mm.
correct.
Mm.
So yeah, it's the there's a multitude of obstacles that our population faces, and it's something our government hopefully will now address. Now the COVID has exposed the inequalities amongst the people.
My sense is
So
that government, via the Department of Basic Education, has been trying to address things like the digital divide, because I have, through my work in schools, seen changes in what teachers have access to, the kinds of training the teachers, um, are being given, the kinds of support that they've received from donor-funded projects, making tablets available to teachers so that they can use them in classrooms. However, what I'm always aware of is that education, like any other um, system that is where the responsibility is borne by government and the outputs are, um, experienced. Okay, the outcomes are experienced by everyone in society. There actually are a number of other stakeholders who could get more involved in a more effective way, because to expect government to do everything is not feasible. So one of the questions that I'm trying to answer by doing interviews like this is who else is doing smart things that could be used and possibly in the long term even used by government, in their rollouts. And I'm particularly obviously interested in how we can better support and equip parents to come on board, in order to help solve these problems. The other thought that occurs in response to what we're saying is that every time there's a major obstacle, there's also a major opportunity. What will incentivize people in the private sector, okay, so anyone who's, or in the NGO sector, but let's think private sector, to invest in a solution that could be rolled out to all South Africans, not just to those who are wealthy enough to be able to afford all the infrastructure, you know, and the tech, etc., is a big question, because obviously for any venture that is not government funded to be viable, there needs to be a return on investment for it to be sustainable, right? So I am curious. I mean, I'm aware of some very amazing initiatives that are happening in the private sector, and I've worked with some of those people, and I applaud, you know, what they were trying to do in the past and what I see them doing now. But they, you know, when you're asking someone to pay, there's always, you know, your limitation is always going to be how much can they afford to pay. And given that we know that, you know, many people in South Africa can't afford food, hence we have a feeding scheme that's run through our schools. To then ask, you know, families to afford to purchase some kind of study aid that's privately, you know, provided is probably non-viable at this stage. So it's, yeah, I'm curious to see how, you know, public-private partnerships as well can roll out solutions. All right, so to go back to your offering, both the EduPortal as well as the LMS that you're trying to develop, what kinds of help do you need? Because at the moment you're man alleen, you're all alone, as which is the translation of that Afrikaans.
I'm the lone ranger.
The Lone Ranger in Mamre.
Absolutely.
Do you have a
Look,
horse? Do you have a
no,
horse?
we have lots of horses in Mamre, but I'm too scared to get on the back of a horse.
Okay.
One bad experience, and that put me off completely.
I can understand.
Yeah, so in terms of assistance, I can do with any assistance at this moment. I know there are lots of people who are experts in the field, and obviously I can only work within my own limitations.
Sure.
I'm
That's all we all can
not a
do.
developer per se. I'm not a software engineer. I'm not a programmer. But I do know how technology works. I know how to bring technologies together. And that essentially is my motivation for trying to create solutions.
Okay.
I'm solutions driven, so if I see a problem, I like to see if I can't.
Definitely demonstrated that with what you've done with the EduPortal in such a short period of time. It's really amazing.
Yeah, so where my skills, where I lack in certain skills, I would love for those skills to be augmented. So I'm talking about PHP developers, JavaScript, CSS, Bootstrap, you know, those kinds of core skills that's required for LMS. So there are quite a few LMS skilled developers in this country. There are obviously also, excuse me,
no problem.
There are also existing LMSs out there. So I don't want to reinvent the wheel.
Yeah.
What I essentially want is to offer a bespoke LMS for certain clients. So currently I'm working on a generic LMS, but then I will then customize it according to the needs of certain clients.
Okay.
Having said that, obviously one needs to then do in-depth marketing and do a survey to understand exactly what are the key requirements by different schools, because each school in different areas, depending on the resources, will then have different skill sets, you know, or certain features. So yeah, so if I can have somebody to assist me in that regard, that would be fantastic, or collaborate even with somebody, you know.
Might also be interesting, you know, to look at what the DBE has in place already in terms of driving the development, you know, of learner management systems. And then the learner management system that I'm most familiar with is Moodle, which has open source
Yeah.
developers and development, as far as I understand. And then the model, as far as I understand, is that people pay for servicing, or maybe like you get
Which in fact,
say again.
sorry to interrupt, but I actually was in the middle of developing an LMS using Moodle as the
Okay,
platform for a private school, but then something happened in between and I couldn't complete the project.
right.
For personal reasons I would
Mm-hmm.
not like to discuss. But Moodle is one of the key platforms. And then, of course, you have Canvas, you have, oh, there's a whole multitude of those. I've already purchased quite a few um, bespoke LMS and templates from different countries, even from Australia, the
Right.
UK. And then I then just tweak it a bit, and add modules as per requirement of the schools. So yeah, so Moodle is definitely one of the main ones that I'm currently using because it's so flexible and it allows you to add different modules from different companies, so it opens up a whole new um, feature set
Of course.
for online learning.
So when you're speaking about developing the LMS, it seems that whereas the EduPortal is something you've developed in order to make resources freely available to anyone who can access it, the LMS venture is something that you're developing in order to sell it directly to private schools. Is that my
Yeah,
understanding correct?
yes, private school, but private and government schools, but obviously the government schools, it might be it's sort of a template which one then can adapt,
Sure.
but it the big prize, of course, is for DBE to come on board, and to say, wow, this is fantastic. Let's roll it out throughout the country. And then, of course, the other area would be for private schools. There it will be completely bespoke
Sure.
because school will have a different requirement. So I'm targeting two areas at the moment.
For sure.
So if there's anybody out there that can collaborate, that would be fantastic.
Well, I'll ask the guy who's doing the tech part of these interviews to put the link to your website, which then has your contact details on it below the video, so people can contact you directly. All right. So one last question, based on your experience both with the EduPortal and in the rest of your career, what advice do you have for anyone who's trying to solve a problem by digital means? Too big a question, or too broad a question? I don't know if.
Yeah, it's look, I take my hat off to anybody who wants to make a difference and to contribute to the broader community, because it's a very unselfish thing that that person is doing, with no expectations of the reward other than knowing that you have assisted somebody, in trying to do something. Also, initially, the whole idea is very noble. One wants to achieve so much, but the moment you start doing it, then you realize the enormity of the task, because then it just goes bigger and bigger and bigger, until you feel that you're becoming a bit overwhelmed to a point that you want to give up. But then you must just go on and remember what's the original intention of this project. So I'm the type of person that once I'm focused, then I just tend to go on and on and try to do as much as possible. And that's when the ideas start flowing.
Sure.
But currently, I've sort of hit the proverbial writer's block,
Okay.
where while I was busy developing the LMS, I just hit that wall, and all my creative juices stopped flowing for now,
Sure.
So it takes a while for me to get back into the groove. But I always encourage anybody who wants to do something for the greater good to go for it, because I hear lots of similar stories on Cape Talk where people have made a difference. They've developed apps. For example, the ESCOM's Push.
Yeah,
The app
it's a fantastic app. Yeah.
that's beautiful. So that's just one example of how people have seen the need for something and that inspired them. Like COVID, for example. so many people have lost their jobs and they are forced to reinvent themselves.
Absolutely.
I fall into that category as well.
Mm.
Fortunately, I've got IT skills, so I could fall back on that.
Sure.
But even though I'm not using it to monetize my projects at the moment, I'm using it to just to use my skills in order to do something good for society.
So, what you seem to have highlighted in your response is one that it takes a lot of perseverance in order to, you know, sustain any kind of intervention that or any kind of venture, right? That one is setting up. But what you also seem to have highlighted is that doing it on one's own is very, very tough. And so I wonder if your advice is to seek collaboration opportunities earlier in the process. Would that be something that you think is a better approach perhaps than just going on one's own? What's your perspective on that?
Absolutely. Look, hindsight is always an exact science, and if I'd known
Absolutely.
then what I know now, I probably would have had second thoughts on continuing with the project.
Yeah,
But every idea has to start somewhere, you know. There has to
of
be a
course.
source, and I'm the source of the project. But when I went into it, I did realize that I was lacking certain skills, and it would be nice to collaborate with somebody. Um, so I think in terms of the LMS, most definitely I will need collaboration. With a portal, I'm also looking at the redesigning the user interface and adding more resources like the actual papers and memos and
Very useful.
for the students. So a database designer, for example, or somebody with MySQL, SQL relational database skills, that would be a huge asset, you know, so that we can, because I have the resources, I just need somebody to link up that to the website. So that's one
And
of the courses.
and what about educators, you know, who can help you select select materials? Because obviously everything that's out on the internet is not of equal quality. I mean, there's variable quality. So
That goes,
getting
that
educators on
goes without
board.
saying. Absolutely, Anthea.
Mm, mm,
As you mentioned, the pedagogy of teaching, you know, one needs some guidance for myself, because I'm not the teacher, I'm just the tactical guy.
mm,
So I need somebody to say, Travis, you need to go into this direction. That information doesn't follow the guidelines by
mm,
the DBE, etc., etc. So absolutely.
okay,
As I mentioned, I've got lots of student friends in the education field. My
for
best
sure.
friend is a high school teacher.
Okay,
I have a friend from Mossel Bay who's a curriculum advisor.
amazing
So,
network.
so
Yeah.
I have lots of friends in the
Mm.
educational field. So I can always call on them as well.
Thank you again for making your time available. I really appreciate it, and I look forward to meeting you in person very soon.
Thanks again, Anthea, for giving me this opportunity. And absolutely, let's schedule a time.
Yes.
And looking forward to hopefully they're offering a nice cup of more coffee.
Yeah, yeah, you can go and find out where it's served in Marmarie in the meantime. And I'll bring some taste navarate from the area here. Okay.
Absolutely looking forward to it.
All right.
Thanks,
Look after
Anthea.
yourself. Enjoy the rest of your day.
You too.
Okay. Bye now.
Bye. Cheers.